following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Throneberry Fields Forever with Jeff Kallman. I'm Ralph Tycho of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we just heard some terrific intro music. Jeff, who wrote that?
I did.
Oh, you the man. Tell me about your music career a little bit.
Well, it's not that I have a career, but I've been playing the guitar since I was a teenager, and when I came to Las Vegas, I decided I wanted to do something with my music once and for all. And since I play the blues kind of on the jazzy side, I started getting out and about and playing in Las Vegas here and there. I've tried to put a band together a couple of times. They didn't work out as I hoped they would, but I'm going to try again.
All right. You know, the idea, it's the journey, not the destination. And if you're working on it, you have a dream to do it, that's terrific.
It's been
a
a
man
nice
of
journey.
multiple passions, music and baseball.
And baseball had quite a passionate week. And
yeah.
Early weekend.
Hey, got to ask you about Bryce. Do you think the contract was fair for Philadelphia?
It actually works out to be almost a team-friendly contract because even with the dollar total, if you ponder the actual time of the deal, it still has the Phillies well enough under the ho-ho-ho competitive balance tax that they can still spend on the farm or on a couple of other players, including a certain Angel who's going to hit the market in 2 years.
You know, the deal motivated the Angels to be thinking about an extension of Trout's contract.
As well they should. Now, let me put a codicil on that. Even a year and a half ago, I still thought, without knowing what was happening at the time, that the Angels might have to think about dealing Trout to rebuild the farm. At the time I said that and wrote that, I wasn't aware that the Angels had pretty much rebuilt their farm to a point where they're now considered a good farm organization instead of the troubles they had had for the previous several seasons. So now it's at a point where, on the assumption that they're still going to want to build a team that their best player and baseball's best player can be proud of, now's the time to think about extending Trout.
It is, but it would be a tough pill to swallow for some people in Anaheim, coming off the Lewis Pujols deal.
The Pujols deal, nobody could see that Pujols was going to be suffering heel and knee injuries. Remember, he had a very good first year in Anaheim. It may not have been at the exact level of his best seasons in St. Louis, but it was good enough that you thought to yourself, they're getting what they paid for and then some. Then the heel, the knee, the injury started hitting him almost continuously.
Yeah.
Nobody could have really seen that happen, even if the Cardinals had a concern about, I think it was his knee they were concerned about, but nobody could see the extent to which that was going to happen. And it's a risk you take no matter who you're signing. Now, all that said, one, Bryce Harper is younger signing this deal than Albert Pujols was when he signed his deal with the Angels. That's critical.
Right.
Two, he too is probably going to still be younger than Robinson Cano is now by the time that deal hits the home stretch. So he's got a lot of years to go. And this is what he wanted as things turned out. The dollars he knew he was going to get. What Harper has been saying, and there's very little to contradict it, is that he wanted to be in one place for the rest of his career, and he wanted to be in a place where they're committed to winning.
Well,
now he said last year he wanted to stay in Washington if that was their plan, but it turned out not to be the case. And the Phillies owner really went to work.
Wait, excuse me a second. Didn't they have a standing deal on the table for a long time?
They had 10 years and $300 million, but the kicker was that about half that money was to be deferred, and it would have reduced the actual value of the deal.
Okay. Wow.
That was the kicker. And I think there was something else going on. Harper and his agent Scott Boras met the Nationals owners on the owners' private turf. They were the only ones that they went to meet on their grounds. Everybody else went to Harper to his home outside Las Vegas. Now here comes the difference. The Phillies owner, John Middleton, he met Harper and Boras in Vegas for the first time, not long after he had met Manny Machado. Now guess what happened? When Machado met him, Machado deferred to his agent. He let his agent do the talking. When they met Harper, Harper practically put duct tape around Boras's mouth and did the talking himself. And that impressed Middleton. I've got a quote from Middleton. I've been around a lot of professional players, but I've never seen a player who could talk about the game with such specific recall. This guy is different. Harper did his own talking about the Phillies' 2008 World Series win. He saw that when he was in high school. He talked in depth about how pitchers approach and attack him and how he approaches and attacks them back, how they generally approach hitters and how the hitters approach them. Like I said, Machado deferred to a mouthpiece. Harper taped his agent's mouth shut and did his own talking. That impressed Middleton.
Whoa,
it would impress me, too.
Middleton has the smarts to pick up on that, too. A lot of owners just look at it as just an exchange of money, and they don't want to get into the player's head before signing him.
It's funny you mention that because Boras himself was at the Saturday press conference where they introduced Harper as a Philly officially, and Boras quoted Middleton. I'm going to read you that quote. Scott, I want to tell you something. I'm not interested in talking about marketing dollars, ticket sales, billboards, concessions. There's only one reason I'm talking to you, and that's because I believe this guy can help us win. I've made enough money in my life. I don't need to make more. My franchise value has risen dramatically over the last 25 years. I don't need it to rise more. If it does, fine. I'm here to win, and I think your guy can help me win. Take that, tankers.
Whoa, that's an appreciative owner.
It went beyond that. You know, Harper got married in 2016, and on the last trip Middleton made to Harper's home outside Vegas toward the end of February, Middleton took nobody with him except his wife. They wanted to meet Harper and his wife, and Middleton is quoted reliably as saying that because he's going on 41 years of marriage, the Harpers were curious as to how the career marriage arc, his phrase, worked, the ups and downs that you face, how you work through those kinds of issues.
Yeah,
So right under the radar, Harper is thinking long-term, and he's thinking more like a man and not the kid who you saw in Washington with the mohawk flapping when his cap fell off. That's a clown question, bro. Even make baseball fun again. He may be growing up faster than we thought.
Yeah. Well, how about his skills? Are they comparable to Machado?
Very much so. In fact, just for my curiosity, because people all week were still harping on his full-season batting average last year, never mind that after he made a couple of adjustments before the All-Star break, he hit 300 in the second half. I sat back and I thought to myself, the batting average, in a way, is an incomplete look at you because all it does is divide your hits by your official at-bats. Maybe they ought to call that a hitting average. I wondered, what's a real batting average? And I thought, everything you do at the plate, your hits, your walks, your intentional walks, your sacrifices, even the times you get hit by a pitch, add all that up and divide it by the plate appearances instead of just the hits by the at-bats. And guess what I came out with? If you want to call that a real batting average, Bryce Harper's last year was .429. That was better than both the top 10 most valuable player award voting position players and Manny Machado. Machado's was only .399.
Wow.
Harper's .429 was also better than all the top 10 American League MVP vote getters, except for J.D. Martinez, Mookie Betts, who won the award, and Mike Trout. And Mike Trout's, by the way, was .507.
Whoa. Trout is something special.
Trout is one of a kind.
Yeah.
Did you know also that in his career, one of the skills that I think is very least appreciated when a guy gets on base is how often he takes the extra base on a follow-up knock. A lot of guys do, a lot of guys don't. Bryce Harper in his career has done it exactly half the time he's been on base.
Really?
For a little perspective, Willie Mays did it 61% of the time. Ricky Henderson did it 55% of the time, and Mike Trout's done it 57% of the time.
So he's right up there.
He's right. He is really right up there if you look at him deeper than the surface stats.
Okay.
We know he has power. We know he's run creative and run productive. Looking at him deeper, he is that good. He's had his inconsistencies. His biggest problem is an outfielder, and the Nationals tore their hair out often enough trying to rein him in on this. He made his mistakes out of over-aggression. It took him a long time to learn that outfield walls are extremely unforgiving when you plow into them.
Yeah.
Old Pete Reiser learned that the hard way.
You should talk to the widow of Pete Reiser,
yeah,
about that. There's a man who really screwed up his career.
And he had a far more dangerous wall to play. Concrete walls in Ebbets Field's right side are even more unforgiving. In fact, they will tell you if you come colliding them, please don't, because I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm going to turn your bones into hamburger.
They actually said that, did they?
I don't know if the wall said that, but that's pretty much what you can expect.
But they cried out in a way. After 5 or 6 times you bounce off it, you think you'd learn. Lagares of my Mets is like that.
I have seen a lot of outfielders who were that way. To them, the wall didn't exist until they learned the hard way.
Right. Well, Lagares is 30, and he's left a lot of his game on the DL.
That he has. Now, one of the issues with Harper last year was that his defense looked like it really went in the tank. But there's a reason for it. If you remember, toward the end of the 2017 season, he injured himself on a base running play. He hyperextended his left knee when he hit a wet base. Now, the left knee that's the leg he pushes off when he hits.
Right.
And it probably took him a little bit longer to get past those effects last year, plus the fact that when he came out of spring training, I think we talked about this before, he was more concerned about his launch angles and pull hitting than he was about just getting his bat on the ball. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You're a power hitter. You're going to get your home runs anyway. It doesn't matter if you swing on the uppercut, swing straight across your belt. You're going to get those home runs. Harper made the adjustment right before the All-Star break, and it turned the season around.
Okay, so you're high on the deal, in other words. I'll put you down for that.
I like the deal because, like I said, he wanted to be in one place for the rest of his career. He wanted to be someplace where they really are committed to winning, and they're not just going to go in the tank for a few years to rebuild, and then I think maybe we'll win in 4 or 5 years. The problem with the tankers is they don't all have the brains that the Cubs and the Astros organizations did to get away with it. Because when you're rebuilding with brains as well as with baseball talent. The Cubs and the Astros had those brains. The others don't by comparison. And the Phillies are automatically got a big boost when they signed him. Not just in the box office, and I understand that they sold 180,000 tickets right out of the chute in the 2 days following Harper's signing. But depending on the projections you read, the Phillies are projected to either win the National League East or fight for it down to the end. I have one in front of me that says, and this is this was when Harper hadn't yet signed, but it looked like he was going there. The Phillies and the Nationals were projected to win 89 games, and that the National League East is going to be a dogfight between the Phillies, the Nats, the Mets, and the Braves. Because remember, the Mets retooled over the winter too.
Oh,
not
yeah.
With a big,
they're looking
not
good.
with a spectacular signing,
Except
but
they
retooled
rash
the line.
of injuries going on.
They retooled the line up and down pretty much.
Well, in this past week, Frazier went down, McNeil went down.
Yeah.
Positive though.
I hear rumors that the Mets are going to have the only mobile hospital on call for among baseball.
Right, well, they've got a MASH unit. It's coming to City Park, City Field. In any event, Dominic Smith has had a great spring so far. He's
so far,
right. And
what you think about with spring training mostly?
Makes it interesting who's going to play first. And
it may not be Peter Alonso because of the old service time shenanigans. That brings me to my next train of thought. Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Has he bulked up or what?
This kid is Major League ready. He's been Major League ready for over a year. Last year, he was promoted 3 levels in the minors, and he tore it up. There's no reason to keep him in the minor leagues anymore unless you're looking to manipulate his service time and keep him from hitting the market a little bit further down the road. Now, here's the part that ought to kill people. The Blue Jays general manager, his name is Ross Atkins, and he said he believes, I still can't believe it, he believes Guerrero Jr. isn't Major League ready because he's, wait for it, only 19 years old. And he fell all over himself trying to explain that. 1 minute he says, I just don't see him as a Major League.
If he just came out with, hey, it's business, all teams do it, we want to keep the kid a year, and we can, an extra year, and we can if we don't call him up till June or July.
Well, what Atkins actually said. I quote, "It really comes down to development. I just don't see him as a major league player. You just pencil him in and he's done. He's 19. He has accomplished everything he can accomplish as an offensive player, and there's so many opportunities for him defensively and what he can do to really maximize the power, the size, and strength that he has." Talking out of both sides of his mouth, I'd say he was talking through a 5-pointed star of an orifice.
Right. Well,
I wish Atkins
you'll
was
find that
because
baseball, the folks in baseball aren't forthcoming. No matter who you root for, it's always that.
Oh God, I wish Atkins were listening to us right now because I would love to tell him about some 19-year-old seasons. And I can start with one that happened last year. Juan Soto of the Nationals. He might have been the Rookie of the Year if not for a guy named Ronald Acuna Jr. with the Braves.
Right.
He had a 923 OPS. He hit 22 home runs. And he didn't come up to the Nats to stay until mid to late May. And he got 3 minor league promotions up from A-level in 1 month to start that year. Harper himself had a 19-year-old season to remember. He was the National League's Rookie of the Year and an All-Star. Ken Griffey Jr., he didn't do quite as well as Harper at age 19. His Hall of Fame greatness started the next year, but he was third in the Rookie of the Year voting with the Mariners. Dwight Gooden, 1984. He busted Herb Score's strikeout record for rookies. Do you remember Wally Bunker with the Orioles?
I remember him well, yeah.
1964, he had a
fizzled
deadly
out,
sinker.
but he had a great year initially.
He was the Rookie of the Year. He had a 2.69 ERA. He led the majors in winning percentage. What happened to him was during a start on a cold Cleveland night in late September that year, he felt something in his arm. He couldn't explain it. Nobody could figure it out, and it turned out to be undiagnosed tears in a tendon or a ligament. And except for games like that 6-hit shutout he threw in the 66 World Series, he was never the same pitcher again. Tony Canigliaro in the same season, 19, set the modern era record for home runs by a major league rookie. Now, he was ill-fated, too. And even going back to 1928, there was a 19-year-old kid on your Giants, a kid named Mel Ott.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, Ott, in one way, had a kind of advantage. He actually got to the Giants at age 17. The thing of it was, manager John McGraw refused to let him go to the minors at all. Kept Ott next to him for 2 years to teach him the game. And there was a reason for it. McGraw was afraid that some nitwit coach or skipper in the minors would try to wreck Ott's swing. He had an unorthodox swing. You remember it well, I'm sure.
Right, where he'd step up.
He looked almost like a pitcher.
Right.
With that front leg kick. So McGraw kept him next to him for 2 years to teach him the whole of the game. And then when he was 19, McGraw turned him loose. And pre-World War II, he was only the National League's home run king. So Ross Atkins in Toronto is talking out of his chapeau.
Yeah.
There have been and there are 19-year-olds who are major league ready.
Right, and this kid, by all accounts, is one of those that's absolutely ready. If he, like I say, it would have made sense if he would have said, "We've got a problem. It's endemic to baseball. If you call a kid up, blah blah blah, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that." And
if it was a real baseball reason, in other words.
Right. It was just a business.
But that doesn't apply to this kid. Now, I have actually seen some who have thought, well, just because he's the son of a Hall of Famer and he's looking good now doesn't mean he'll stay that way. But it's 50-50 no matter who you're talking about. But if you really want to run a survey down, there have been children of good, great, and even Hall of Fame players who played Major League Baseball. And it isn't a given that the sons will equal or pass the fathers. If it was, Earl Averill Jr., Dale Berra, Tony Gwynn Jr., and Dick and Dave Sisler would have been Hall of Famers.
It isn't a given, but it isn't out of the realm of possibility. Junior Griffey.
And I can think of two sons who left their fathers way behind, Roberto Alomar and Ken Griffey.
Yes.
And Vlad Jr. looks at least as good as his father did. So I wonder if he's got the old man's ability to hit bad balls.
And stay healthy for 19 years.
Vladimir Guerrero Sr. was the best bad ball hitter baseball I think ever saw this side of Yogi Berra. If it was in the area code, Vlad Sr. would swing at it and hit it.
Absolutely right. When you grew up in New York, was it, I'm 72, and the Mets and the Giants left when I was 11. How old were you, and who did you root for after the Giants and Dodgers left?
I was a little too young to root for either one of them. I was pushing 3 when they left.
Oh, okay.
I didn't really become baseball conscious until 1961, I think it was. And that year you had two things happening. You had the Mantle Maris home run chase, and you had the Cincinnati Reds going from almost worst to the National League pennant.
Right, led by Hank Bauer, former New York Yankee right fielder.
Led by nobody of the sort. Hank Bauer wasn't even a factor. Hank Bauer wasn't a factor. He had nothing to do with the Reds. Hank Bauer had nothing to do with the Reds. Fred Hutchinson was their manager.
Oh, I'm thinking of 66. I'm sorry. Never mind.
No, I was talking about 61. Fred Hutchinson,
and I'm thinking of 66 and
yeah.
And Baltimore.
That was after he made his bones managing the Kansas City A's.
Yeah, well, what
and if that doesn't
brought that
toughen you up, I
together
don't
was
think
Frank
anything will.
Robinson. That's what screwed me up in my head. Robinson played for both that Baltimore team and that Cincinnati team. So, long time ago. How about that?
Yeah, but that was when I started getting baseball conscious, and then right after that came the Mets.
Yeah, next year.
My comedy of errors.
Wow. And it doesn't seem to get better over the years in terms of comedy of errors.
There's a significant difference. In 1962 and 1963, like I said a couple of weeks ago, the Mets didn't just suck. They sucked with style.
Right.
And now when they sucked
and
funny.
Swallowed. That's how bad they were.
I'll let that one slide.
But
now when they suck, it's not funny.
What? Pardon me?
Now when they suck, it's not funny.
No, and it really wasn't for a true baseball fan who grew up in a city that had the World Series every year. It was a birthright that a New York fan would have the World Series, and that kind of
and so much for competitive balance in the reserve era.
Right, but this is a moment to give credit to one of the unsung people who was responsible for the Mets gelling in 1969 as quickly as they did. And I think we might have even mentioned last week George Weiss, who played an integral part. But people forget that the
Weiss
man
built the
who was
farm
in charge of minor league development, and
Whitey Herzog.
He was one of the smartest baseball men ever, number one. And
exactly. There's a reason why he's a Hall of Fame manager.
Casey.
Well, Whitey Herzog, do you know the story about how he left the Mets?
No, but he left with Joe McDonald, if I remember correctly.
Whitey Herzog was pushed out because he had a deal on the table where he would trade a nondescript pitcher named Don Shaw and get a couple of good players back as part of that deal. The problem was M. Donald Grant heard about it and went ballistic. For whatever reason, Don Shaw was a pet of his. And the idea that Herzog was willing to trade him put an end to Herzog's days in New York. Until then, Herzog was probably in line to succeed Gil Hodges as the Mets manager if it came to that, and of course before Hodges passed away.
Yeah.
But even thinking about that deal cooked Herzog's goose with the Mets.
Which also, I have to say this, I'm a Met fan, but the most unclassy move in the history of baseball was when the Mets at Gil's funeral, instead of calling a press conference a few days later, which would have cost some bucks because you would have had to pay a lunch, assemble the writers, this, that, and the other thing, they announced at the funeral that Yogi Berra was taking over. They didn't have to do that. That was
not a brilliant idea. No. And I don't fault Yogi for that at all. That's not something he would have done.
No, not at all. But they should have given it a week, shiver for the guy, whatever it takes. But not at the funeral. That's a classless move.
My favorite story about Gil Hodges. My favorite story about Gil Hodges was something that happened in his office in the clubhouse after the Mets won the '69 World Series, and one reporter asked him to explain how all this could happen. Hodges just flashed a grin, spread his hands apart, and said, "Can't be done."
You cannot explain it. But if you will recall,
even though there was a way you could explain it, the key was simple.
Intervention.
Well, there was 6 parts divine intervention and half a dozen parts Hodges being smart enough to use his entire roster judiciously. The Mets didn't burn out down the stretch the way the Cubs did. Leo DeRocher with the Cubs overworked his regulars, leaned too heavily on just 1 or 2 bullpen pitchers. Hodges didn't make that mistake. Hodges moved everybody, his regulars and his reserves, in and out as and when needed, and he has still had a fresh club down the stretch.
Right. He made some in-season acquisitions as well, getting Don Clendenin.
Getting really Clendenin helped big.
Glider coming over Ed Charles. I don't think that was in season, but that was a great platoon with Gary.
I believe they got him in spring training.
Okay.
Or toward the end of the previous season, but he was there. But the real key is the way Hodges managed the personnel he had. He didn't let them get burned out.
Yeah, that was a biggie.
That I think was the real key to the 1969 Mets, aside from that pitching staff.
Right.
When you have a
and
manager,
by the way, I jokingly said divine intervention. If
it may not have been a joke,
there was some divine intervention in Hodges' career, it would have taken place in those World Series that he really didn't do well in, one of which he had the Catholic Church prayed for him. They stopped services in Brooklyn. And
there was one priest, and it wasn't in Hodges' own church, but it wasn't even Hodges' own church, but the priest said after the sermon, "Please say a prayer for Gil Hodges."
Right. Okay. I remember that literally being 7 years old, hearing that, and trying to make heads or tails of religion in those days, and. I remember what my father said when he read it. He said, "Goyish cuffs." Now, anybody out there that understands that, it simply explains it all. Gil Hodges should be in the Hall of Fame.
Hodges was a remarkable combination of player and manager, but really his signature season as a manager was 1969.
Oh, absolutely. And
if you want to talk about divine intervention, hark back to Sandy Koufax working as an analyst for NBC, talking to Tom Seaver, and somewhat puckishly asking Seaver if God was a Met fan, and Seaver replied, and I quote, "I don't know, Sandy, but I think he may have rented an apartment in New York this week."
That's beautiful. That's great. I listened to the Mets on the radio today, and I heard something very interesting. 2 of the former stars, one of them was Shamsky, and I can't think of the other one. They're both writing books.
Shamsky's is coming out this month.
Shamsky's is. What's the other book being? Who's writing the other one?
One that I know of that's also coming out later this month is Wayne Coffey, the longtime Village Voice writer. He has a book out coming out about 1969 called "They Said It Couldn't Be Done."
That must be the book they were talking about.
They're both on my list.
They're going to revisit it, and one of the things that in Shamsky's book, he got to spend time with Tom Seaver in his winery up in Napa.
That's the hook. That's the hook around which the book goes. It's possibly the last time he'll get to do it because Tom Seaver, sadly, is not well. He suffered a case of Lyme disease back in the early 90s, and over the years, the after effects have included afflicting Seaver with short-term memory loss. It's possible that Seaver will not be able to attend the commemoration of the 1969 Mets at Citi Field this July.
Oh, wow. That would be terrible. That would be
It wouldn't be the 1969 Mets without Seaver.
No, absolutely not. And not only that, they've had some real bad luck in the past years, 2 years maybe. First of all, Rusty Staub has passed away. Ed Kranepool is in desperate need of a kidney.
Bud Harrelson is dealing, I believe, with Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, Buddy Harrelson, right?
You remember I talked before about the real batting average concept?
Right.
While I was running that diagnostic on Bryce Harper and both leagues' MVP candidates last year, just for my own curiosity, I did that involving Hall of Fame pitchers whose careers were after World War II. I wanted to see what the real batting averages were against them. By the same criteria I came up with, hits, walks, intentional walks, sacrifices, hit by pitch, divided by plate appearances. And guess what I came up with? Of the post-World War II Hall of Fame careers, the top 5 in ascending order are Pedro Martinez, Sandy Koufax, Juan Marichal, Catfish Hunter, and Tom Seaver.
Wow.
The RBA against Seaver is 302. The RBA against Pedro Martinez is 288. That's the lowest of the Hall of Fame starting pitchers. Among the relief pitchers, the lowest is Mariano Rivera, 278.
Would you get the same statistical accuracy or close to accurate as possible by just using the OPS thing, both for pitchers and batters?
Not exactly, because OPS is based half on base percentage, and on base percentages calculation involves official at bats, not total plate appearances.
Good point.
But this should tell you how rather amazing Martinez, Koufax, Marichal, and Seaver were. And also Don Sutton had a 303, surprisingly enough. And Robin Roberts was 305, which is a real surprise considering all the home runs he gave up.
And he played for a bad defensive team in Philly for a lot of years.
That's exactly right. Well, what happened to the 50s Phillies was, after they won the 1950 pennant, I think what broke them was losing Curt Simmons to the military.
Oh, yes.
And Roberts had to shoulder the burden of the starting rotation because without Simmons, he was the only good to great pitcher they had, and they leaned on him so.
Right, and
if you were to look at Roberts,
and Sisler was getting old. I think Sisler retired.
Retired, but the real key was they never again had the pitching all around that they had in 1950. Losing Curt Simmons to 2 years of military service, I think, broke their pitching in half, especially with Jim Constantine getting old.
Right, that was
the relief pitcher. He won the MVP
first
in
closer, if I recall.
He was one of the him and Joe Page were the prototypes.
Right.
So Page burned himself out kind of quickly, but those were the prototypes, and a little bit later in that decade you had pitchers like Hoyt Wilhelm and Elroy Face with the Pirates.
Right.
So there's where it came together.
Yeah. Got to mention it every time his name comes up on a podcast. I will say that Face did little or nothing to help Roberto Clemente in his adjustment to Major League Ball and this adjustment to the United States. He was a bigot, and for whatever motivated him to be that way, I don't know. But I have it on very good authority that he was detrimental to Clemente's head. So I will point that out whenever his name comes up.
If that's true, that's sad. If that's true, that's sad.
But
because Face was a great pitcher.
No question about that. I think he was 19-1 one year.
That was 1959. Face was so effective in those years that he was once invited onto the Ed Sullivan Show to demonstrate his money pitch, the forkball.
Right. Wow.
And yeah, in those years, there were times when Sullivan would have players on the show after they had done something spectacular or had been part of a World Series winner, things like that. So it's not as weird sounding as you think to discover that Elroy Pace was
he'd
on
announce
that show.
players who were sitting in the audience. He'd say, "Here's Tom Tresh, the great World Series." I remember that very well. And What's My Line was a great show. You could go to YouTube and get some What's My Lines.
Oh, I watched it when I was growing up. In fact, there's a funny story about What's My Line involving Yogi Berra.
Oh, really?
When Berra managed the Yankees the first time in 1964, they brought him on What's My Line. And the panel figured him out almost immediately. So to fill the time, John Daly, who was the host, brought Carmen Berra, his wife, out on camera and introduced her as Yogi's lovely bride. The CBS switchboards exploded with indignant callers demanding to know how Berra got away with throwing over his wife and 3 kids for this little homewrecker. Because Carmen Berra was a great-looking lady, even into her 30s, 40s, and 50s. And when she came out on camera looking as well as she did, and Daly introduces her in all innocence as Yogi's lovely bride. Right.
Everybody thought this was a new bride.
They thought Berra threw his family over. Which, of course, he wouldn't do.
No, not with Carmen. He was too smart. He was too smart to do something like that. And you say, well, he wasn't a very smart man, but he left her with the business. She had the business acumen, and he had that way about him that he could put his money in her hands. Basically.
He was smarter than people thought when it came to business. When it came to business off the field, the two of them were a team, really. When he got involved with the Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink,
that made
he made himself go all the way to a vice presidency because he was smart about promotion, and he figured
what
things
he'd do?
out.
He'd have heroes of the day with the Yankees wear the Yoo-Hoo T-shirt under the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So, or put it on after the game or whatever. But when you see Daily News photographs of Mickey Mantle in the Yoo-Hoo thing and Roger Maris in the Yoo-Hoo thing,
Berra would steer them that way. He would throw those chances at them, and a lot of Yankees took him up on it. Yeah.
They made a little bucks, and he made a lot of bucks with Yoo-Hoo. And Yoo-Hoo had a kind of a unique taste. It wasn't really pure chocolate milk. I don't know what it was, but it was satisfying. It wasn't like you were drinking garbage.
Well, I wasn't that big a fan of the drink myself. I personally thought it tasted like liquid chalk. But I got that a lot of people liked the stuff.
Right. But I think they liked it more because of the Yankee image and because of Yogi's image. Let's put it that way.
And he took it with him when he moved to the Mets as a coach.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
he
stayed with Yoo-Hoo for a very long time until apparently they changed the flavor of the drink slightly, and Yogi and Carmen didn't like it.
Maybe that's where they put in the.
So they sold their stock. No, this is years after I tried it.
Oh, okay.
This happened, I believe, in the 80s or the early 90s. Off the top of my head, I forget which.
And you don't hear much about them today?
No, not compared to all the energy drinks.
Yes. We've had a good show. This is just falling into a effortless communique on baseball, on
Well, today's show was so
slant on
comfortable,
things.
you could even say that it was so simple a child of 5 could do it.
Well,
if you reach for a child of 5,
child
I'll have
of
your
5
stripes.
with an encyclopedic memory for stuff that went on 50 years ago, so it's going to be tough to find that. Don't be modest, young man. You're a natural at this.
These days, at my age, every time somebody calls me young man, I'm flattered.
Well,
I'm even more flattered when I get carded.
You know, I was talking to somebody the other day. I'm 72. 72 is the new 90. So, anyway.
You give me hope for my future.
Absolutely. Stay well this week. We will talk next week. I'm
same bat
incredibly
time, same bat channel.
impressed by your musical ability as well. You have a fine theme song, and let's keep using it.
I will agree to that.
All right, my friend. Till that time, as Jackie Gleason used to say to Steve McQueen, he'd say, "Until that time, Eustace, until that time." And that was Soldier in the Rain.
I'm remembering a newscaster on Channel 5 in New York did the evening news. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I never forgot the way he signed off. Thanking you for your time this time until next time.
I like
Bill
that.
Jorgensen, that's who it was.
Like I say, an encyclopedic memory. Thank you, sir, for your time.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you out there for listening. The show is Throneberry Fields Forever. The host is Jeff Kallman. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and it is my privilege, Jeff. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Back next week, everybody. Be good. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.